Howdy, this is Frau Walker, and in this video we're going to continue speaking about World War II, speaking specifically about the Holocaust and how it came to be that this happened. So we're picking up with anti-Semitism, and it's important that you understand that anti-Semitism was not invented by the Nazis. Anti-Semitism has been a thing pretty much ever since the religion started to exist, and obviously got a lot worse when the story of the Passion of Christ, when Jesus was nailed to the cross, people used the Jewish people as a religion, as a scapegoat for killing the Savior. And that is a narrative that was spun pretty widely by those who were Christian, as a way to kind of make an us versus them argument. And very unfortunate, because the Catholic Church perpetrated a lot of that. But the tradition of hate had been there for centuries, and the Nazis took what was, unfortunately at that time, a widely held idea by many, and used it outrageously. And it was a little bit less focused on the religion and a little bit more focused on what people were seeing visually. So, you and I don't necessarily have any outward signs of religion or faith. If I pulled out my necklace, you'd see a cross. So that might give you some ideas of what my religion is. But there are religions in the world where you can see outwardly what religion they are. Like, for example, the Sikh religion, men wear turbans, and in the Muslim faith, you'll see women wearing hijabs, and in Orthodox Judaism, you see men dressed in long black kaftans, and they will have a black hat and black locks, much like priests will wear their black shirt and black pants and a white little square sign that they're a priest. These are outward signs of faith, and the Nazis used those outward signs to try to make people feel like they were different than everybody else. And they used also when it says science here, it's a fake science, which is why I put quotes around it. They used eugenics to try and prove that, which basically was a chart of many different human faces that showed big foreheads or big noses, and said that's what a Jewish person looks like. When really religion has nothing to do with how you look, right? Somebody could convert to Judaism. It doesn't necessarily mean that their face is going to look like that. And so eugenics is false. It is incorrect and not real. And they used that as a way to bring this tolerance of death up. And people just decided that since these people weren't humans, that they are okay to be killed. That's what the Nazis tried to say to everybody, is that they thought that Jews were subhuman, which is not true. Everybody around the world is human. Doesn't matter what their religion is. We all bleed red, right? And interestingly enough, the way that the Nazis, I should say, built up tolerance of death in the Germans is by actually euthanizing the handicapped and disabled first. And so people who were deaf, blind, people who were thought to be sick but not really sick, people with mental health issues, people who were not normal, the Nazi normal. So anybody in the LBGTQIA plus community, anybody who was a different lifestyle. So gypsies were also targeted for their nomadic lifestyle. Very, very unfortunate. And after the Nazis turned around and started fighting with the Russians in 1941, it was pretty clear to everybody that we were going to lose the war because you can't win a two-front war when you're fighting the Allied powers like the Nazis were. So later on, Hitler asked his top staff to convene at the Wannsee, the palace on the Wannsee Lake in Berlin, and come up with a final solution for the Jewish question, which is where we get the change from just killing disabled people to creating ghettos to liquidating ghettos into work camps or concentration camps, and then turning those concentration camps finally into death camps. And unfortunately, so many people died. It was written down on paper that we had about 6 million people die. And the reason that we know that is because the Nazis were German, and Germans are very, very good at writing everything down and putting their stamp on it and making sure that everything is extremely organized and transparent. And so thank God we have all that written evidence so we could prosecute those who were left over for the Nuremberg trials after the war was over. But 6 million is what's written down. We actually think, based on all of the stories and everybody getting all of their knowledge and facts together now, 80 years after the war, that it's probably upwards of 9 million Jewish people and gypsies, not to mention the civilians and all the other prisoners that were taken that the Nazis thought were subhuman for whatever reason that they chose. And in your head, I need you to understand that this was an attempt to destroy everything Jewish, to try to wipe them off the planet, and so the Nazis tried every tactic they could to do that with absolutely brutal means, and they called it a cleaning up of Europe. But really now, after everything is said and done, this makes every Jewish person and every German person, this defines their history now. And so we have to grapple with that, even those of us who are left over. And a lot of people question everybody who was involved, myself included. I also question my family. The big questions like, how could people let this happen? Were you a part of it? Weren't you a part of it? How can we make sure that this doesn't happen again? And this is actually one of the big reasons why I teach you all this, because you need to know the truth and you need to face it so that way we can fight it with knowledge and facts. And acknowledging it is the very first step of doing that. There were people who resisted, who were Germans. Some of them were even perpetrating themselves as Nazis, or I should say depicting themselves as Nazis. There weren't a lot of people who made that decision, because it was very clear that if you decided to fight against the Nazis, that was you being okay with dying. So it would be like you committing suicide, because you had to understand that any resistance against the Nazis was going to be put down with brutal force, and you might not have been the first person to go. So there were 4 different kinds of people who resisted. There were people who resisted for political reasons, usually people who were in the Communist Party, because they were the other people who were targeted by the Nazis. And so they were the ones who right from the beginning tried to resist. And oftentimes with the help of the Allied powers, the Russians and the Americans, would often try to connect with them, because in the very beginning, they were the ones who resisted pretty much first, along with the churches. But it's not necessarily all churches, because in the beginning, Catholicism very much aligned with what the Nazi propaganda was saying. So in the beginning, the church that resisted was the original protester, or the Protestant church. So everybody's name who you see here, these are the most famous people from the Lutheran church that resisted. There was also people in society who just decided that what was happening was wrong and they wanted to stand up against that. Some of the people who are listed here in the civil resistance and these groups were the reason that like Anne Frank was able to get to the Netherlands. So they worked under the table without being really spoken about by many people to kind of do like a black market of trying to get as many people out of Germany as possible or Europe because the Nazi Empire had reached had a pretty wide reach. And then finally, the military resistance, which is the one that had the chance of working the best because obviously they were armed and the military had very close ties to Hitler. So if you were in the right position, you might be able to, in the movie Valkyrie with Tom Cruise that many of you are going to see, you would see there that Klaus Schenk, Graf von Stauffenberg, tried to actually murder Hitler himself in an explosion at the Wolfschanze, the Wolf's Lair out in Poland. And that happened on the 20th of July, and the plan was actually to kill the Nazi head of the snake first and then make a broadcast that the Germans had taken over their own country in a political / military coup to try to finish World War II early, because the military was really upset about how many people were being lost, how many German boys and men were being lost because of a stupid war. And what's really important for you to understand is that all of these people from these 4 different types of military resistance, it takes a lot of courage to understand and fight against the Nazi regime at this time because you know you're going to die. So it's thinking about like human rights, what's the golden rule, knowing how to spot it when you see that bad things are happening and doing something about it. And many of you know, after having seen bullies in high school or school bullies throughout your lives, that it's not easy to say something against that because you're also worried about what it makes you look like. So if you can imagine that, only your life is on the line. Hitler couldn't have picked a bigger fight. There was no way he was going to win this war. But to say that actually meant that you would be committing treason. So people didn't say that. They told him that they were going to win pretty much all the way up until the last week or so before he killed himself in the bunker in Berlin. And everybody was coming from all sides at that point. So it was really only a matter of time, which was really disgusting when he said, everybody left in Berlin needs to fight. And then he killed himself. And there were lots of needless blood spent in World War II. Yeah, well, war is just bad no matter how you look at it. The Americans were coming not only with the British from Normandy, they were also coming from the south. And then the Russians were coming from the east. And the British were continuing their bombing raids. And on May 8th, 1945, we finally have Victory in Europe Day, which is what VE Day stands for. And when the Allies got to Germany and all of these different places, they found my numbers are kind of weird there at the bottom. They should be flipped. But they found horrific evidence of concentration camps and death camps like Auschwitz. And it was later then decided that they were going to round up as many officers as they possibly could and put them on trial for the Nuremberg trials. I would highly suggest watching that movie. They did a good job of depicting the Nuremberg trials in the specifically my favorite one is with Alec Baldwin. You should definitely watch that movie. I believe it's named Nuremberg Trials if you have time. It's very interesting. And the final numbers that you see here, minus the United States, are the people who were like the war was in their country on their soil here. You can see here the USSR is the one that actually lost the most, interestingly enough. Military, 13 million, civilian, 7 million. That is just as much as what the Axis lost in military and civilian lives. It's absolutely outrageous. And uh, over $1 billion was spent fighting this war. Okay, so that is all that we have for you right now. I'm going to speak next about after the war leading into the Ost-West conflict and what the Americans call the Cold War. We'll see you shortly.